give you an affidavit.
So I'm Brennan Williams, and I'm the vice chair of the Northeast CPC, and Erica wasn't able to make it tonight, so I'm leading this. I should say up front that I have social anxiety, so I find this to be very stressful, but I will do my best. Tonight we have Ed Harness from the Civilian Policing Oversight Agency coming to talk with two members from the Police Oversight Board as well, to let us know what they do to support the community. Okay, so now we're going to do our presentation. So this is Ed Harness. He's Executive Director of the CPOA, and I don't know how you want to do this. Take it away. It's all yours.
And the Marquette fan. And a Marquette fan. So, how many of you have lived in Albuquerque for more than 40 years? 40. 40 years. 40.
61.
Okay. How many of you were aware that there was police oversight in 1978
No.
in the city of Albuquerque? Yes. There's been oversight, civilian police oversight in Albuquerque since 1978. However, it's been through many changes and many iterations based upon many studies. Obviously, the latest of which is the Department of Justice findings that brought about the settlement agreement, the CASA. As a result of the CASA, the City Council decided to reconfigure oversight in Albuquerque again, and so they passed an ordinance, the Police Oversight Ordinance, which formulated the Police Oversight Board, which serves the community now. There are 9 volunteer members on the Police Oversight Board. I'm happy to announce that we now have Bill Cass, Dr. Bill Cass, as a new member of our board. He's going to be at his first meeting on Thursday. I look forward very much to working with him. And we have 8 others, and they represent a cross-section of the community based upon residential location. The Police Oversight Board answers only to the City Council. It does not answer to the mayor. It does not answer to the chief of police. It answers solely to the City Council. They meet on a monthly basis, and they make recommendations to the Albuquerque Police Department. They make recommendations based upon civilian complaints, and they also make policy recommendations. By ordinance, 51% of what the board's function is supposed to do is to be focusing on policy. The other 49, I guess, would be police officer investigations of citizen complaints. Serving as their daily operation is the Civilian Police Oversight Agency, of which I am the director. We have 4 investigators. We're trying to fill our data analyst position still. Thank you, City of Albuquerque HR. We have a community engagement specialist, and then there's a senior admin assistant who helps facilitate our operations. We investigate civilian complaints that come in from all different sources. You can file a complaint by fax, which we actually received one the other day. You can fill it out online with our complaint form. You can go to any command station and file a complaint. You can file a complaint with any police officer that you come in contact with if you have an issue with how they have provided their service to you. That complaint will come to us, and it will go through our process. We will evaluate to see whether or not it's appropriate that the complaint is mediated, possibly. So if it's something that is minor, then according to the ordinance from the City of Albuquerque, we are supposed to mediate those cases first. It actually says all cases should be mediated first. And that is in complete contrast to the settlement agreement, which says no allegations of misconduct can be mediated. So, how do you work that out? Well, we're in the process of negotiating, essentially, with the Department of Justice to carve out certain types of complaints where we can use mediation. I thought we had established a nice level. We were not going to allow any use of force cases to be mediated, no allegations of police bias, no repeat offenders for officers to use mediation, and anything that is a level 5 allegation as far as discipline or above could not be mediated. Throughout the structure of discipline within the department, since I've mentioned level 5, there are 7 levels of discipline within the discipline matrix as outlined in the Albuquerque Police Department policies. They go from level 7, which is the lowest, a verbal reprimand or a written reprimand, to a level 1, which is immediate termination. Most policies in the Albuquerque Police Department had a defined discipline level assigned to them. So, for example, failing to record an event with the on-body recording device, that's a level 7. So the first time the officer doesn't do it, it is a verbal reprimand. And if they do it again within a year, it's a written reprimand. And if they do it another time within a year, then it can lead to an 8-hour suspension. That matrix is outlined in department policy. So going back to the functions of the CPOA, we will receive the complaints, we will investigate them, and we have 5 choices for our findings. There's not sustained, which means by a preponderance of the evidence, we could not prove the allegations from the complainant. And by a preponderance of evidence, that means that the feather tipped the scale one way versus the other. So it has to tip one way or the other for a preponderance of the evidence. That's not beyond a reasonable doubt, like in a criminal trial. This is simply by a preponderance of the evidence. So we have not sustained, which means the officer didn't do it by preponderance of the evidence. We have sustained, which means we found that there was a violation of policy. And when I say we are investigating, we are only investigating administrative complaints. We do not investigate any allegations that involve criminal activity. If there is criminal activity involved, then that investigation will go back to APD and Internal Affairs. There have been a couple of extraordinary circumstances where we determined that it wasn't appropriate for APD to investigate the criminal allegations, so we made a presentation to the Department of Justice and to the monitoring team based upon the allegations. It's well publicized that those were related to the Mary Hawks shooting, the allegations of video tampering, and other allegations related to that case we didn't feel was appropriate for APD to investigate, so we made a report to the Department of Justice. We understand that in doing that investigation, we have no idea where it is or what the results are. If you read the newspapers, you know that in the civil trial, one expert says they were tampered with, and another expert says they weren't. So we'll see what happens from the criminal investigation. So back to our investigations. We only do administrative investigations. That's violations of policy. The other 3 findings are exonerated. That means that the officer did exactly what the person complained about, and it didn't violate policy. So if somebody complains, hey, that officer towed my vehicle, and then we'll do the investigation, and then we'll find out that the officer followed all the policies and the protocols and towed the vehicle, then yes, that officer towed the vehicle and they were supposed to tow the vehicle, so that officer is exonerated. There's also unfounded, which means essentially that whatever the complainant said happened, didn't happen. So we will get complaints that the officer was rude to me. And then we will get the lapel video from the incident. And we will find one, that maybe that officer never even spoke with that person. Or two, they were courteous and polite and they treated them with dignity. And then that would be unfounded. Okay? And then the last one is sustained but not based upon what was in the complaint. And most often, that is the non-recording of the event. Because the citizen has no idea whether or not they were being recorded during the incident when they filed their complaint. So, as a matter of course and as a matter of the investigation, our investigators will order or get the lapel videos from that incident. And if there is not a recording, and if under policy it should have been recorded, then that would be sustained but not based upon the original complaint, because the complainant didn't say, hey, they didn't record my event. We do get those, and then we'll find that they are or are not recorded. But that's just an example of the one that happens the most. Our investigations will last 90 to 120 days. And after that, there's a 30-day review period by the Police Oversight Board and the entire command structure of the Albuquerque Police Department. If there is a sustained violation, then I will review the officer's discipline history, and I will make a recommendation based upon the matrix that's outlined in Albuquerque Police Department's discipline policy. I do not stray from the matrix. If it says it's supposed to be a level 4 second offense, then that's what I assign. I do not stray. I do not make decisions about mitigating factors or contributing factors. I make a recommendation based strictly on the matrix. My recommendation is only a recommendation. The chief does not have to, nor does anybody in the command staff have to, concur with my recommendation, nor do they have to concur with the investigation that the investigators in our office has completed. If there is a non-concurrence, then that non-concurrence must be reported back to the Oversight Board within 30 days. I always get policy and discipline mixed up. One's 45 and one's 30. I think it's, yeah. Anyway, the chief has a definite time when he has to respond to us about why he didn't concur with the findings, and he's supposed to explain why he didn't concur with our findings. Okay? So, that's been a bit of a contentious item for us. The Police Oversight Board has been in existence since February of 2015. And it took 6 months for them to get trained and ready to review cases. And then after that, I think they probably have reviewed close to 300 cases because there was a huge backlog. And while the non-concurrences from the chief were in the file as I would get it back, he was failing to write to the Police Oversight Board in accordance with the ordinance, telling the board why he disagreed with what their recommendation was, and explaining what he decided to do. So did he decide that the amount of punishment wasn't appropriate? Did he decide that the investigation was incorrect? And so, So we just have now, as of the last monitor's report, started to get letters. We got a huge batch of letters of non-concurrences simply saying, I disagree, with no explanation. As of the last 60 days, we have started to get explanations and non-concurrences. So, for example, as a part of the Police Oversight Board's duties, they review officer-involved shootings. Currently, there is a backlog of officer-involved shootings going back to 2014, which have not been reviewed by an administrative agency. Some of these have not been reviewed by the district attorney's office either. And a few years ago, and I wasn't here then, somebody decided that they were going to bifurcate the system and nothing could happen with the administrative side of the investigation until the criminal side of the investigation was completed. So lots of administrative investigations sat waiting for the district attorney's office to do the review. Well, you all live in this community and you all know the friction between the previous district attorney and the police department. And as she told me, I have a day job and we'll get to those when we can get to them. That's what she told me when I called, because we, the board, decided that they were going to review the Detective Jacobs, Lieutenant Brockles shooting, which has still not been criminally reviewed. But in June of 2016, the ordinance changed to allow the Oversight Board to do the administrative review as long as they had the permission of the district attorney's office, or as long as the district attorney said, no, that won't interfere with my criminal case, you can go ahead. Well, there should really be no reason why an administrative review would interfere with a criminal review, because the standards are different. And you can look at that every day across the nation as, for example, the officer who was just found not guilty in Philandro Castro. He was found not guilty, but he won't be a police officer again because of violations of policy. It was not criminal, according to the jury, but he did violate policy. There's a 10th Circuit appellate case where a deputy sheriff stepped in front of a vehicle to fire at the driver. The deputy sheriff was not criminally liable, according to the 10th Circuit appellate court. However, that violates policy, so that deputy sheriff is no longer a deputy sheriff. So there are those two standards, and you have to understand the levels are different. There's criminal and there's administrative, and we just deal with the administrative, okay? So, for an example of our most recent non-concurrences, we reviewed an officer-involved shooting where an officer was ordered by the sergeant to go into the apartment and do a protective sweep so that the field tech could go in and process the apartment for a burglary. The protective sweep, in my opinion, was an improper search of that apartment. That apartment had not been burglarized. The person that was arrested and the other person that drove away from that scene were authorized to go into the apartment. Now, yes, they entered the apartment in an unconventional fashion. They went in through the broken window, which plastic had been placed over. But the owner, or the lessor of the apartment, had given that person the permission to go in there and retrieve the stuff. The person whose apartment it was in jail. The window had been broken out the night before by the fiancé. The landlord had been out there and put up the protective plastic. The arrest happened 2 blocks away. It was not adjacent to the apartment. So, in my mind, a protective sweep is not warranted without a warrant in that case. So the officer should not have been in that apartment in the first place. That officer entered the apartment, accidentally discharged his weapon, and the poor gentleman who happened to get up for a glass of water in the middle of the night was struck in the neck. So, our recommendation was investigate the sergeant for ordering the search on a protective sweep, which we believe was improper, and 88-hour suspension for the officer for having his finger on the trigger and pulling the weapon, discharging the weapon without having a proper sight target. This shooting happened back in 2014. This is based upon the policies that were in place in 2014. The chief, through, I'm sure, the city attorney's office, wrote a memo based on case law, based upon exigency and safekeeping. I didn't argue exigency and safekeeping. I argued protective sweep because those are 2 different standards. But I only make the recommendations. As far as discipline, the chief stated because there was no other weapons problems with this officer in his handling of his weapon, he should only get a written reprimand. So, that's a good example of our non-concurrences and our differences. The monitoring team on the last visit has told me and has told Internal Affairs that the command staff's interpretation of instances must be closely enough related in order to move up the matrix discipline is not in policy. And it's a wrong interpretation. And it's a black and white issue. And if they want that flexibility, then they will have to write it into policy. And that will be a part of the 6th monitor's report. So, the board is in the process of reviewing, they're attempting to review 2 officer-involved shootings a month to try and take care of the backlog. The board also reviews all serious use of force cases. And when I say review, that means that we're not doing the investigation, we're only reviewing the investigation conducted by the department's Internal Affairs Division, either the Critical Incident Review Team or their Force Investigation Team, thank you. The acronyms. So we only review the investigations as they are conducted. So I will get the entire file, including the officer statements. The board will get the entire file without the officer statements, and they must vote to be able to view the officer statements under a Supreme Court case called Garrity. Garrity is the officer's protection against against their statements being used against them criminally because they are compelled to give us an interview in the administrative investigation because it's part of their job and they must do it as part of their employment. So the statement that they give as it relates to policy is held separate. The board members will have that information set up for them at the Internal Affairs Division, and they will go and review that information in conjunction with the reports and the video and everything else as it relates to an officer-involved shooting, and a cert case if they choose to, a serious use of force case. And then we have the other citizen complaints that we investigated. We average about 250 complaints a year, although that number is going to go up drastically because we are now receiving the 311 calls for officer driving behavior. Those tickets are coming to us directly now. And so we've seen a significant uptick in our traffic in the agency. Those cases come in sometimes with some actionable information, and sometimes they come in with little or nothing that we can do. So all we can do is follow up with them and ask them if they have more information. Our other big issue with the department at this point is the board's ability to review policy and policies as they've been changed. This has been an ongoing issue for 2 years. Paragraph 288 of the settlement agreement says that the chief will submit to the agency all changes related to this agreement. So that means that all 37 policies that are a part of the settlement agreement should have been submitted to the agency. In this case, the agency is the Police Oversight Board, for its review and for its ability to comment on changes and for them to pass along any concerns that they may have as it relates to those changes in policy. We have had several meetings with the Department of Justice, with the Monitor, with APD, and we have yet to reach a solution. The board wants to be at the end of the process because they don't believe they should see a policy when it's in the process of changing. The plain language is pretty clear. It says the changes to the board, to the agency. So the board this week, or I'm sorry, the chair this week, has drafted a letter that's going to go to the Monitor. It is going to ask the judge to make a decision on that particular issue because we have not been able to reach an agreement. Typically what happens when the monitors come to town and when the reports come out, all of the stakeholders and all of the parties, if they have concerns, they'll sit down and they'll have a meeting and they'll try to hash some of those things out and they'll try to come up with a written agreement to move forward. That way the judge doesn't have to take the issue on and doesn't have to make a decision. But this particular issue has reached a point where the board feels that it wants Judge Brack to make a decision on that particular issue. Because it is supposed to be the majority of time of what they're doing, evaluating policies. And those particular policies are clearly important based upon the settlement agreement. Yes, sir.
After 2 years, how many policies have been supplied to you, to the board, and how many changes has the city made to the policies that have been submitted?
The department has not submitted any policies to the board as an entity. The argument that the department makes is that the board has a seat on the Policies, Procedures, and Review Board. The board has a seat at the Office of Policy Analysis. And our agency has a seat at the SOP Review Committee. And their argument is that suffices for input as far as the board. There are countless changes that have been made to the policies over the last 2 years, and many of them are already in their review process after having been approved by the Monitor. All the 37 policies have been approved, but they're now in their 6-month review process, and some of them even coming up to their 12-month review process. But the the department has not submitted any of those policies as an entity. And Director Slauson is on record as apologizing, saying that they know the board didn't have input, but they had to get these policies done, so suffice, that's what they did. That was at a meeting 7-8 months ago.
Is there anybody other than the monitoring commission and the judge that can say you're not complying with what was required of you 2 years ago?
No.
So it'll take the judge to do that.
Right. When I did a presentation not long ago, trying to describe all the players for the settlement agreement, and so since the All-Star game is today, I think it's appropriate. Judge Brack is the team owner. Okay. Dr. Ginger is the umpire, the monitor. He calls the balls and strikes, interprets the rules.
What was his name?
Dr. Ginger, the monitor. He's the umpire. And then all of the amici and the stakeholders and the parties are the players on the field. So ultimately, Judge Brack is going to be the one that makes the decisions on the team. That's why he's the owner. But, you know, on a day-to-day basis or inning by inning, Dr. Ginger is the umpire and he's the monitor. So he's the one to say, yes, it's a strike, no, it's a ball. Yes, you're in compliance, no, you're not in compliance. And there's a lot of confusion about the monitor's role. He is not APD's consultant. He is not there to tell them how to do it. He's only there to tell them, yes, it's right, or no, it's not. There are plenty of examples of approved policies, approved procedures throughout the United States for departments that are under settlement agreements for the department to model itself. So, I will often hear the chief opine that the monitor is not available for him for this or that. That's not been my experience. If I email monitor, I usually have a response within the same day. Policy and concurrence are the two big issues that we have going down. What questions can I answer for you? Hey, where's our plates? Come on, come on.
I just have a quick question.
We are ready.
Is it a real judge? Yes, he's a federal judge. He's a federal judge, yes, because the settlement agreement came about from a lawsuit from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division suing the city of Albuquerque because of the department's
Ask a
We're going to go in
question.
order.
alleged pattern of excessive use of force. So yes, he's a real judge. He is a real judge.
And we go to the hearings.
Yes.
He's a judge for life.
Federal judge? Life? Yes. Some of them are 14 last bankruptcy, 14 years. Yeah, he's life. Yeah. Okay. Who's number one?
Okay.
Oh, so
Before you
I'm so excited.
start answering questions, can I have just a minute?
sure.
So, because I wanted to introduce myself, I'm a new member of the board, or one of the new members, there's another, and I thought I'd like to give you a little bit of information about me. I grew up in South Dakota, so I don't feel comfortable talking about myself, but I've lived in Albuquerque for 48 years, and my wife Ann is here. I worked at Sandia Labs and I retired almost 20 years ago, so I've been retired for a long time, and I didn't have to wait until October. But since I've retired, I've been more active in community things, including Democratic Party politics. And because of Ann was a lawyer and a judge, And we have a lot of connections to the legal community as a result of that. And because of other, political connections, just people that we come to know. For example, Raul Torres was lived in my ward when I was a ward chair. His father went to school to law school with Ann. So just in the interest of disclosure, those are some of the connections that exist. And my primary interest is in policy on the police oversight board, and I'm looking forward to doing this. I think that having a perspective from what some of the police problems are, I think stem from the fact that they get a lot of things dumped on them by the political arm of the system, and they don't have the resources to deal with it. And the result is things get prioritized within the police department. And I think it ought to be up to the community to prioritize how laws are enforced. And I think there ought to be a lot more community input. And so I see my connections to the community as a strength to add to this board for that purpose. And I'm very interested in getting started. I've been following the process around for several years, but this is going to put me more on the inside of the process, and I'm looking forward to it. So that's all.
Those of you who don't know, there is a mayoral candidate forum coming up in August. I believe it's August 29th. And that's going to be that's a Tuesday, a mayoral candidate forum, which will be following the format of League of Women Voters. Tuesday, May 29th at El Dorado High School at the Performing Arts Center, 6:30 p.m.
July 29th.
Yeah, since this August.
August 29th.
Since Dr. Cass brought up something political, I thought I'd let you know again, candidates are not supposed to be.
There's another.
There's also another one
do you
on
have
September.
Another one on September 6th,
6th.
the
Sorry.
day before the voting begins. Okay,
So-
thank you.
And that one's specific.
That one is at the African American Center.
And that's specifically on police reform.
That is,
Public safety.
it is more on public safety, yes.
And who's sponsoring that one?
APD Forward and League of Women Voters will be conducting it.
Okay.
And the one in August, the end of August, is being hosted by the City Council district coalitions for council districts 4 and 7. So this is council 4 here. 7, I think, is wherever.
Okay, so one little thing before the question
Number 1.
starts.
Oh,
2-minute limit.
okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, number 1. Go
Number
ahead.
1.
So what is the rate of discordance between what you recommend and what the police chief actually does as far as what is carried out for discipline? And is that tracked? Because, yeah, I think that's important.
It is
data to
tracked.
have.
It is tracked. The last time we looked at it, it was at about 30%, but I think it's closer to 50% based upon the last few months. Unfortunately, I haven't had a data analyst for a couple of months, so some of those numbers aren't being tracked, but they will be. And it certainly is a number that we look at, and it's a number that we report on in our annual report.
So if you find that it's above, like if you're saying this needs to be done and the chief is like, no, that doesn't need to be done, a lot of the time, I think 50% is a lot. That a lot of the time, I mean, is there some kind of follow-up to that? Like some sort of briefing where, you're all brought together saying, here's what the chief says and why, and so,
No.
I mean, how is 50-50 acceptable? Because it
Well,
feels
it's
like then
because,
we don't have any power.
that's why we need public involvement. We need the citizens of Albuquerque to say, no, this isn't right. You can look at, and all of our findings letters are posted online at our website, which is cabq.gov/CPOA. All of our finding letters are there, and the chief's non-concurrence letters are there as well. So the only recourse is public pressure at this point for accountability.
It just
That's
doesn't
the-
seem very formal. You know, it
that's-
just doesn't seem like, it seems like it ends up just being about power in the end, rather than like, here's my voice, I'm telling you what I think as a group.
Well, you
And the
could,
chief is like, no.
you could contact your counselor and ask them to change the ordinance. If you wanted to have the commission to have more power. I come from Wisconsin, and it's much different there, where in Wisconsin, we hire the chief, we approve all promotions, we approve all policy, and we're the appellate division of police discipline. So if an officer is suspended 24 hours or more, they would appeal to our commission, not the police, not the chief. So the Wisconsin model is much different, but it's by statute and it's been there since 1860 something. Yes, sir.
And I wanted to, Mr. Harness,
I'm informal, I'm Ed.
I'm a very big supporter of the Police Oversight Board and the CPOA, but I'm fearful that you guys are a toothless tiger because of just exactly what she's saying. I would like to encourage everybody here. They're trying to change the city ordinance so they have subpoena powers. If they want to get phone records or anything like that, they can't do it right now. They have to go to court. They could do it under the old statute, but since 1978, I'm fearful that what's going to happen is because when that judge, the owner, goes away, and that monitor, the umpire, goes away, then we're back to this same old thing of a power struggle between who is supposed to do what. So I would urge you to talk to your city councilman because we have prepared some provisions of the document, a revision of the ordinance that can ask the chief, they can ask the chief to come in and publicly explain his things at an oversight meeting. So that's something that we should somehow, maybe you guys should look at and
Do
see
you
if you
have a copy of that?
I can get you one. Yeah, we can get one.
We'll
I
be
know-
discussing it on Thursday, the new ordinance changes.
Yeah, the police oversight meeting. I went to the subcommittee and helped them write some of that stuff, but I just want people to know that you really don't have any authority. The chief does whatever he wants. He's been ignoring them. I filed an inspection public records request to get some of those records, to see them. They ignored me. I had to file a lawsuit to get the records. So while you have these kind of guys here who are wonderful, right, and who are doing all kinds of great things, you've got some other parts of the department in the administration that is going to go away when if we don't have some strength for this oversight.
That's why we need public engagement, because we are no more powerful than the public that's behind us. So that's why we publish all of our findings letters. That's why our meetings are televised. That's why we post the non-concurrences so you can look at the reasons, the rationale. Our agency does very thorough investigations. We have good investigators. And like I said, I follow the matrix exactly as it's outlined. I don't deviate from it. So you can see some of the ramifications. The cadet that just graduated that got into trouble, who was on discipline and got hired. Was on discipline and got hired. I don't know how you do that.
What do you mean undisciplined?
She had been disciplined for fraternization, having an affair with a subordinate, as a civilian, having an affair with an officer on overtime.
And then she did what?
DUI.
Yes.
She's a DWI, isn't she?
Yes. Number 3.
I actually have 2 questions, but I'll limit this to one and maybe come back around to the other one a little bit later. Pardon me for this sounding a little processy, but I followed you through your description of your process through the complaint, the investigation, and so forth. And I couldn't quite tell the role of the board. I understood the determination of sustained and unsustained and so forth, and your recommendation for discipline. what does the board do?
The board actually, we do the investigation, the board actually approves the investigation and the recommendation. Or they could send it back and say, no, we want this issue investigated further. The board is the actual finder of the discipline.
Okay, so it goes from you to the board?
Correct.
Rather than from you to APD chief?
Correct. It goes from our agency to the board, and then the board forwards it over to the chief.
You do have one more minute if you want to ask your second question.
Okay. You said that the police chief, or APD hierarchy, has said that they think that the roles of board and the agency in various different policy and procedure review processes fulfills the requirement in the settlement agreement.
Yes.
What's flawed about that? Why is that not okay? Why is that not true?
Because I believe the plain language of the paragraph says the chief shall submit policy changes to the agency. The agency. And the agency
Board
in full.
Yeah.
Because there is no opportunity for the board to contemplate that policy as a body. For all 9 of them to discuss it, review it, talk about it. There is also no opportunity for those changes to be aired publicly, as they would be if they were presented to the board, to say, okay, we've got the use of force policy, we're making these changes based upon our data analysis of this issue, and here's why we're making this change, which the board values that airing of the changes for the public. So that's why we disagree with AB's position.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Right here in the front row, number 4.
Number 4.
So I'm confused.
Okay.
As far as who reports to who. So the CPC reports to, who are they accountable to?
Nobody.
There's no accountability, there's nothing, you can kind of just do whatever you want to do?
They're independent from the city.
Okay.
They do get monitored from the Department of Justice, and then they tell us where in compliance they are according to the paragraphs regarding community policing council.
Okay.
And their role is to create recommendations, much like the ones that the Civilian Police Oversight Board does, from the community to then be passed on to the chief.
Okay.
So those could be either community-oriented policing problems or policy or supporting a recommendation that the Civilian Police Oversight Agency has.
Okay, and then the agency, you said answers to the city council, right?
Our agency answers to the board, and the board answers to the city council.
Oh, okay, so the board answers to the city council. So the agency makes recommendations on policy changes to the board approves them, and then it goes...
The board will make the policy recommendations because the board works on the policies. On occasion, based upon an investigation, an investigator will make a recommendation, but that is put before the board for the board to review and approve.
Okay.
Once the board makes an approval of a policy recommendation, it goes to the chief.
Okay, then it goes to the chief.
Yes.
All right, and so the oversight agency and the oversight board, you are accountable to the city council.
Correct.
So no one's accountable to DOJ at this point.
Accountable to DOJ?
Yeah, I mean, where's the accountability?
The city council. The city council.
Okay, so
The city council is oversees the board and in turn oversees the agency.
Okay.
The Department of Justice is here because they brought the lawsuit that
Right.
resulted in the settlement agreement.
Right, okay.
So the Department of Justice is a party helping all of the members, the stakeholders, come into compliance along with the monitoring team.
And where are the meetings televised? How would I watch those CPC?
GovTV?
GovTV?
Yep.
Okay.
Thursday night, 5 o'clock.
And where could I read the city ordinance?
The city ordinance webpage.
Okay. Does it have a number or a name?
It's
or
9, it's the civilian oversight ordinance, and it's 9-4-3. 3 of them.
Thank you.
Certainly. Number 5.
Number 5. Director Harris, thank you for your presentation. This gentleman kind of asked my question regarding, I was going to ask what your view of kind of ideally the submission and review of those policies would be, and how that would unfold.
Ideally,
And then I have one more question.
okay. Yes, ideally, the chief or his or her designee would come to the Police Oversight Board meeting, second Thursday of every month, at 5 o'clock at the City Council chambers or on GovTV. And then they would present the changes of a policy and the rationale for those changes to the policy for the board to consider and for the board to contemplate, and then come back to the chief with any of their concerns at a later date. So, as I said, the example before, okay, we've got the use of force policy. We're making this change based upon our analysis of our numbers, and we believe that this change is needed because of what we're seeing, an increase of this or a decrease in that. You know, a rationale for why the policy is being changed and what the implications are.
Thanks. And then my follow-up question too, kind of piggybacking on what Mr. Cass just said, which is ideally trying to have, and I think you referenced Milwaukee, and kind of ideally having greater oversight input from the community and people represented by the community on policy issues, priorities, things like that. And since we're in this kind of ideological hypothetical, I was wondering, as those things unfold, because I've looked into those across communities. For example, the Sacramento Police Department was under a consent decree. The community got together, tried to codify some of that agreement into city ordinance. They're unsuccessful because of the collective bargaining agreement that the police officers union has. And I was just wondering if that's, would something like that, in your opinion, be a major impediment, or have you given any thought to this in this community?
There is a lot of the collective bargaining agreement that's actually in the settlement agreement. So, for example, the investigative timelines are straight out of the collective bargaining agreement. The collective bargaining agreement, the collective bargaining agreement is actually being negotiated now, and we will be discussing issues that we'd like to be addressed in the collective bargaining agreement on Thursday. But it can be an impediment to reform of oversight, certainly. They are reticent to have civilians have a voice. They're comfortable with me because I was a police officer, so they feel like I'm safe for some reason. But they're reticent to have everyday citizens, even though the Police Oversight Board goes through a bunch of training. They go through the Citizens Police Academy, they go through civil rights training, Fourth Amendment trainings, that's search and seizure. They go through all of that training. They go through ride-alongs. They do the FATS training, the shoot, don't shoot training. They go through all of that. Yet they fear citizens, voice. And so yes, it could be an impediment. But there is progress. I mean, the fact of us having the ability to recommend them didn't exist before. So there is progress that's been made. Thank you. 6?
Mr. Harness, I was just wondering what the umpire and yourself cost the taxpayers in Albuquerque.
Our budget is currently 0.5% of the Albuquerque Police Department's budget.
which is what?
I believe it's about 875,000, our agency. And the monitor's bid was $4 million.
How many people does he employ?
10 to 12?
Yes?
Yeah. How many people does the monitor employ? 10 to 12?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that was over a 4-year period.
That's over, well, it's going to be 6, at a minimum 6, because we're already past the 2-year threshold for operational compliance for all of the paragraphs. And for Albuquerque Police Department to come out of, the monitor's name is James Ginger. For the settlement agreement to reach its completion, the department must be in operational compliance for 2 years on all the paragraphs. So first they have to reach operational compliance, and then they have to be observed for 2 years, having that being ingrained in its culture. As far as your concerns about the cost to the community, I will venture to say that our proper oversight will save the city much more money than the millions of dollars that is paid out in civil litigation.
Well, that's basically what we have. Events bar runs the state, and that's the issue. And I would like to see the matrix used by the judges that are allowing a lot of these repeat offenders, because the police officer sounds like he has to go through a lot of different administrative time, taking him away from investigating.
Well,
and then, you know, it sounds like you're fair, and you'll put the matrix down on them as far as the information you have. Why
all that we ask is no matter how many times somebody is released from jail based upon the system, is that the Albuquerque Police Department interact with that person within the Constitution. That's all we ask. So I understand the frustrations of repeat offenders, and I understand the frustration of chasing the radio because they're understaffed. I understand all of that. Okay? But
have you been a victim of a crime?
I've been a police officer, sir.
How long? 6 years?
I was a police officer for 6 years and I was an MP for 6 years.
Okay,
So I understand what it's like on the streets.
It just the cost benefit, you know, addressing the police officers as the real criminal.
We don't.
That's all
I think Lieutenant Burke can vouch for the fact that our agency does not treat any of the officers like criminals. We're fair with them. I believe that we have a great amount of respect from the department itself for the way that we do treat the officers. 70% of our investigation we find for the officer. 70% of the time.
One of the things I will say is that since Director Harness has taken over the Civilian Police Oversight Agency and the Police Oversight Board, is we've seen a much more structured, robust, meaningful process. And you should be proud that in Albuquerque you do have an oversight board, because many cities, agencies in the state don't even have them. State Police, BCSO, Santa Fe, no other agency in the state has one. So at least there has been that step in the right direction, right? We know that there are still things that need to be worked out and processes that need to be clarified, but the fact that it's here, that it's working much better than it was 2 years ago, and that there's a wheel that's turning, I think we should all at least acknowledge and give both the department, CPOA, and the community a gold star for.
Okay, number
We've
7.
got one more question, our last question, number 7 here in the front.
Well, you had indicated how important it is to have more community input, and I'm picking up because you really don't have power.
Correct.
So what is it that you and your board can do to advertise far more? I mean, get it out, talk, maybe give talks in different places so that they have an understanding and you can get more involvement, get more people to be involved. Because it doesn't make sense that you don't have any power
Well, we do have a community engagement specialist, and she is working a comprehensive outreach plan. Everything that we do is publicized. Every meeting is published, and the agendas are out, and they're open to the public, and people can come.
I know, but you
They're on
have to engage.
GovTV.
How do you engage people to really?
Well, I would have expected that certain allegations that have happened since I've gotten here would have sparked some community outrage, and they have not. So I'm not sure what it's going to take to engage the community. They're pretty apathetic at this point.
I think there's a bright spot, and I think I've been coming to this CPC for a couple of years, and I know many of the people that are here, and I think it's changed, it's evolved. And I think this is one of the places where the community is supposed to engage with the police and the police with the community. I think that's happening here, and I think it's a much more positive engagement than it was 2 years ago. And I thank the people on the CPC and the officers, the civilians who serve on this, and I think the audience is better educated. And I think that's one of the parts of the process that's really important, is to educate the public about what's going on. And I think that's happening. It's slow, but I think it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, we've done presentations, we've taught at Oasis, we've gone to schools, we've gone out, we do television interviews. We're out there if the people want to listen and they want to hear.
Okay,
One last question.
I have one last
Mark,
question. You didn't end up saying the difference between how many complaints as opposed to compliments. So how many compliments do?
It is about 50-50 as far as complaints and commendations. We're seeing less of the commendations now because a lot of them are coming through Blue Team as opposed to
Where?
Blue Team, which is it's a software program that the officers have and use for their reporting. So many more of those are coming through Blue Team. But if you go to our website, you'll see that you can file a commendation or a complaint with the same form, at the same place. It's right there for you. But it's still probably about 50-50.
Okay, well, that's good to know it's 50-50. Okay, well, thank
All right.
you all.
Thank you.